How you guys doing? Morning. Thank you so much for coming to our session this morning. I hope you all are having a great week here at Ignite in Orlando. We're going to talk today about unlocking the power of data by integrating your apps, your services with Power BI. So with Power BI, we've built such an amazing BI service, self-service BI service in the cloud, and we also have amazing authoring tools for data analysts, but we also built an entire platform for it, and it allows developers and ISVs to actually integrate in many different ways. So this session is focused on giving you a walkthrough of all of the potential integration points that you might find interesting for you with Power BI. My name is Miguel Llopis, and I work on the Gateways and Connectors team at Microsoft. Guess what we do? We build gateways and we build connectors for Power BI and also for other services that we build as part of the business application platform, including things like Power Apps, Flow, Logic Apps. We also integrate the gateway with things like Azure Analysis Services and so on. So, we kind of sister team to Power BI in the organization, and I'm very happy to have here today with me Lukasz. Lukasz, you want to say something?
Hi, everyone. My name is Łukasz Pawłowski. I'm a program manager on the Power BI team, working on Power BI Embedded, as well as working on our data journalism program and a number of other capabilities.
Very cool. So let's get a little bit into the agenda we're going to cover today. We're going to talk a whole lot about Power BI Embedded and custom visualizations, and we're also going to talk about the Data Connectors SDK. How many of you are actually already using one of these technologies? Okay. How many of you are actually developing? For example, you've developed a connector or you've developed a custom visual. Okay, how many of you would like to learn how to do it today? Okay, awesome, you've come to the right place. So as session objectives, not surprisingly, we're going to explain to you the capabilities of Power BI Embedded. We have some great announcements and updates to make there. We can also help you understand embedded analytics and how to position that in your organization, how to adopt the new features we're putting up for Power BI developers, and then how you can extend Power BI and all of the other services I mentioned before, by the way, with custom connectors. Lukasz is going to cover Power BI Embedded and developer update for the next several minutes, so I'll come back on stage later today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Miguel. So great, excited to talk with you about Power BI Embedded. Who here writes C# code? Okay, keep your hands up if you write JavaScript code. Okay, great. Who knows what an application backend is? Okay, great. Trick question. It's amazing how many people don't answer that in the affirmative. So when we talk about Power BI and Power BI Embedded, we really think about how we can help developers, but also organizations disseminate data. And really, today, modern organizations are dealing with the digital transformation that's happening. To address that, what they're doing is they're trying to build systems of intelligence from wherever the data is coming in to wherever the user is actually touching that data, helping them through tools that help them make quick decisions, see the data, or even applying things like machine learning or artificial intelligence to help augment their understanding of the data. So what tools do we have to bring to build systems of intelligence in relationship to data? I think that's really the Power BI is on. When we think about apps, apps are really where users are productive, right? We build apps, we buy apps because they help us do something faster than if we were to do it on a stone tablet with a chisel. Right? They help us do some kind of operational workflow. I think what's interesting is that when we do surveys, only about 22% of employees say they have access to the data they need in order to make decisions. And it turns out apps is where those employees are sitting on a day-to-day basis. Whether you're working in a CRM solution, helping customers be successful, you're working on an ERP solution, making sure that the inventory is stocked, making sure that orders are being fulfilled, whether you're working at a bank or at an internet startup, you name it. Everyone's using an app, right? And so how do we actually take all of these systems of intelligence and all this data and put it inside apps so that people can be productive? And I think that's really the journey that Power BI is on, is we want to be able to help you bring contextual, interactive, transparent insights directly where all of the users interact with data, whether that's in a portal, something like PowerBI.com, SharePoint, but also all of the line of business applications and all of the ISV SaaS applications that you're building on a day-to-day basis. Why? Because building these applications with data is actually kind of hard. building for all of the different devices, all of the different technologies that you have, making sure that you can connect to all of the actual data sources with the proliferation of data sources, and making sure that you can build quickly interactive, compelling visualizations without having to invest heavily in building your own BI stack for your own company or for your own application. Those things are hard. And Power BI actually helps fill that need by providing you built-in tools and capabilities that allow you to do that very, very quickly. And that brings us to Power BI. Who here is a Power BI user? Ooh, that's amazing. That's awesome. Thank you so much for using our product. We're really thankful that you're users. Power BI is a cloud service, and it allows you to easily roll data and intelligence to your users inside organizations, but also inside applications. It has a standard data technology that allows you to pull data from any kind of data source. And Miguel will talk about that later. He'll show you how to add your own data source and expose it to the world of Power BI users. And the data sources can be on premises, they can be in the cloud, they can be big data, they can be small data, they can be any kind of data. And it's really important to say that Power BI is a platform for pulling any of that kind of data, providing a set of capabilities. We know that we have data visualization capabilities like charting and dashboarding and reporting. But also, we have natural language query capabilities. We have great announcements in this session about that in a little bit. We have custom visualization capabilities where you can build the visualization that best suits your user so that they understand the data better, faster, make better decisions. And all of this is an open, extensible cloud platform that's available globally. It's something like 12 or 20 clusters globally. And then the whole purpose is to enable people to take action. And really, that's where apps are where people take action on data, and we'll show you how you can use Power BI to enable that. So let's talk a little bit about Power BI Embedded. Who has used Power BI Embedded in the past? Okay, great. So for some of you, you will have used something we call a Power BI Workspace collection. It was a service we added to Azure that was a sort of standalone service. And in addition, some people were using some REST APIs that we provided on top of PowerBI.com. 2 services, 2 licensing models. It was kind of hard to understand, like, what can you do here, what can you do there? In June of this year, we converged those services into a single service, which is just the PowerBI.com service. It was a huge step for us. It allowed us to have one service with one API and one licensing model. That means that you can address the needs of internal users as well as external or application users with a single set of technology, a single service, and a single consistent licensing model. And today, I'm really excited because we get to talk about the next step. The next step of this converged service is the new Power BI Embedded service in Azure. Now, what is the Power BI Embedded service? I'm going to go into. But what it means for you, if you're a developer, if you're an ISV building a SaaS-style application, you can now go into Azure, purchase Power BI, pay for it, all on a single subscription, manage it, just like you do all the other Azure services that you use, and then deploy that out to your users. So it's a huge, huge step in our journey as we've built the one service, and now we've introduced Power BI Embedded again into Azure. And it's going to be available next week. So you'll be able to start October 1st with it. So let's talk a little bit about what it is, right? So the first thing is you'll notice that it's in Azure. I'll show you a demo of that. It allows you to take stunning reports, all those things that you see in PowerBI.com that business users have, and you can embed those into your own applications. You get faster time to value because you're using our visualization tools. You're not having a bunch of developers in your organization building D3 visuals on one-off case. Right? So you're actually able to use our visualizations, our custom visuals, many visuals that people have published into our open gallery. You're able to scale this dynamically in Azure. I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. And that's huge. This element of elasticity behind your SaaS application is critical to your success as an application developer in the modern world. And then it all leverages standard SDKs that are compliant, standards-based, using JavaScript, REST, HTML5, that enables modern web developers to quickly and easily take Power BI content and integrate it seamlessly into your applications. I'll show you a demo in a little bit. So let's talk a little bit more in detail about what is the new thing in Azure. What we've done is we've added something we call capacities. And you can purchase these capacities in Azure. And the way to think about a capacity is it's like a virtual machine that has some cores, some CPU cores and some memory, and it's dedicated to your workload. That means you get fast, performant, and scalable results inside your application. And what we've done is we've allowed you to purchase those things inside Azure. So it's all in your Azure bill. That also means that if you're a BizSpark startup, if you have any kind of Azure incentive programs, this capability, this capacity that you can purchase in Azure counts against all of that. So it's really a seamless experience for a person who's working on Azure. It also provides a set of APIs in Azure Resource Manager that can automate the deployment of these things. So when we talk about being able to scale up and scale down one of these capacities, pause and resume those capacities, not only can you do that manually, as I will show you in the demo, you can also do that programmatically as an automated step. So that if you're trying to script out the management of your application at global scale, you have the tools that you needed. And most importantly, especially for developers, but the flexibility of pricing here and billing is really key. You now have hourly pricing for the Power BI embedded if you wish to use it, which means that you can start, stop, use as much as you want, and use as little as you want at an incredibly low cost. And I'll show you that here in a little bit. So without further ado, let us go and see a demo. So I'm going to start with a browser window. And we're going to start in a packaged application. So this application is an example application we built. It's a warehouse management scenario. So you can imagine there's a warehouse. I'm going to log in securely to my application. Now this application is authenticating this user. We have concepts inside Power BI about data roles. You can have data security. And this application is implementing all of those. You'll notice that I've signed in here as Frank. And I'm seeing Frank's dashboard. And you can see that I have a set of reports. These are Power BI reports. They're just as interactive as you would expect them to be. And they're deeply integrated inside this application. Now, some parts of the report might be implemented in a different visualization technology. That's OK. We also, if this will take just a second here, but this will update. And it's a data-driven, it's a real-time visualization, also built in Power BI. So they're streaming data into the Power BI backend and presenting it here in context inside the application. And now building this is very, very straightforward. I don't have time to show you the actual code for this application, but I want to show you how you configure this in Azure with Power BI embedded. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to my Azure portal. Now, in my Azure portal, you'll notice that I can go and create a new service. And I'm going to just go search for Power BI. And when I do so, you'll see a couple of things. The first result will be the old Power BI Workspace collection. That service is being sunset. We launched the new Power BI, the single service, in June. There's a year-long sunset period, or as determined by your EA with Microsoft. So if you're using the Power BI Workspace collection, you'll need to migrate. And we have great instructions on the web for how to do that. But the new thing is hidden for some reason down here. It's called Power BI Embedded. And here, what I can do is I can immediately start using the value of Power BI. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go create some capacity here. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a resource name. So I'm going to go PBI demo ignite. Close enough. OK. We're going to use an existing resource group. You'll notice that I already have a subscription here. So that's already taken care of. And I'm going to go choose an existing resource group, which is great because I'm going to have billing on that resource group, which means that if I'm using resource groups to segment my workloads or billing or pass on costs to customers, I can go do that. I'm going to go choose a location. In this case, I'm going to choose the US Central. Now, the location is going to be based on where your Power BI service is located. So when you sign up for Power BI, which I'll show you in a second, you actually choose a place. It's based on the AAD user that's signed up. You want to choose the location for this Power BI embedded capacity in the same place. And then you can choose a pricing plan. You'll notice that we have 6 pricing plans at launch. And you have everything from 1 vCore, which is great for development, all the way up to 32 vCores, which is a pretty substantial deployment. You're going to run a whole lot of reports through that. I'll show you more details about what these are in the slides in a second. I'm going to choose the smallest one, because that's usually what, what I use. One thing that I wanted to call out while we're here is I wanted to show you this little tiny thing. You probably can't see it all the way at the bottom of the screen. It's called automation options. And while I'm using the UI for all of this demo, there's all of this wonderful ARM code that you can copy and paste and start rolling, right? So it's all there. It's just you get to customize it and use it in your PowerShell scripts or in your deployment scripts. Let me go ahead and call create, and you'll notice that the deployment's in process. What we're doing is we're actually instantiating this capacity in the back end in our clusters, and then we're going to provide it out to you to use. Now, I'm going to sort of skip forward. That takes just a couple of seconds, but I'm going to use one that I've already pre-created, just so that we can go through more quickly. So when I have one of these capacities, obviously it has a name. It has a region, right? So it's got a resource group. It's in a specific region. Couple of things that are important about these things is when you have one of these things, you need to administer them, and you need to put content into the capacities that you purchase. I'll show you that piece in a second, but before we get there, you need to understand a couple of things, right? First off, that there are capacity administrators, which for some reason this is not showing me a capacity administrator at this time, which means that we will go to my other capacity. Oh, I think I understand why. I paused it. So you can see here that if I go to capacity administrators, you'll see that my name is here. I can add more people. So if I have people in my organization that are responsible for managing the infrastructure underneath my application, I can set them up here so that they can go and fine-tune things in the Power BI UI. I'm also able to go and use the admin scripts. You'll also notice that I have all of these resource health and support requests capabilities that are just part of the Azure portal, so that if you're running into kind of issues, it's all integrated in your overall Azure support system. So great. So now that I have this capacity created and it's running, what can I kind of do with it, right? Well, first off, let me go assign it to a particular workspace. So what you'll see here, if I refresh this browser, is I've logged into powerbi.com. And powerbi.com provides me a set of capabilities, including the ability to assign workspaces into capacities. And what you'll notice is that I have 3 capacities, and you'll see that there's several that are paused, right? So you'll see that they're paused, and one that I just created, which is active. So now what I can do is I can go into this capacity, and I can go assign workspaces to this capacity, right? Which means that once the content's in here, then all of Power BI embedded lights up. You can start using it for applications that are authenticating users without those users having Power BI licenses. Okay, so what I can do is I can go in and assign a workspace, and I can do that by user. Now, how do I do that, or for an entire organization? Most ISVs will end up choosing the entire organization. On this particular cluster, I personally don't have permission to choose that option. So I can do by workspace, and if I were to choose a particular user, I might give myself, let me just give myself, choose it. And then if I were to press apply, what it would do is it would take the workspaces that I have access to and move it into this capacity. How does that all work with Power BI embedded? In a couple of minutes, we'll talk about a master user account that's used for your application to connect to Power BI. And really what we're talking about in these user workflows here is the master user that your application is using, and assigning the workspaces that the master user owns into these workspaces. Okay? I'm not going to do this because I have a lot of workspaces and it's going to take a long time. But that's the process that you follow. You purchase in Azure, and then you assign content into the purchased workspaces here in the Power BI portal. Now, let's say you're running your application for a little while. Let's say you have a lot of users coming in. You need to scale up. How can you scale up one of these capacities? What I can do is I can come into the pricing tier option, and in here I can choose capacities. You notice I have A1. This is the currently selected option, but I can go all the way up to A6. So if I select A2 and press select down at the bottom, What it's actually going to do is it's already scaling it for me. And you'll see how quickly it happens. It'll take a couple of seconds. And then you'll see that the new capability has been assigned, which means that I can dynamically and elastically scale up and scale down the resources in response to user load or in response to the forecast of user load, which is critical if you're building a SaaS application. Okay? So we'll just let that run. The next thing that I want to do is I want to tell you that you can actually pause and resume these, right? So what I can do is if I don't need a capacity for a period of time, I can just stop it. If I'm a developer, this is critical. I don't want to be paying for capacity if I'm not actively developing against the service. So if you have a bunch of developers, you can have a developer thing and you can go and pause it and resume it as needed. Okay, great. So the capacity finished. So it's already kind of at P2. So if I come back to pricing tier, it should show me that. Great. So we have the elements of elasticity now for the first time with Power BI embedded. And that's going to enable developers to really build applications much more quickly than they have before. Okay, so with that, I'm going to hop back into the slide deck. And we're going to take a look at a few slides, some details. So first off, pricing, right? So I mentioned hourly pricing. The lowest SKU has a price of approximately $1 per hour. Right? Going up, you can purchase even the largest SKU at $32 an hour, or you have a monthly pricing option. You'll also notice the peak renders per hour, and these are page renders. What that means is when I load a report, it has a page. I can have 100 visuals on that page. It's a render per page. And so you have the sort of sense of how much throughput you can get for each one of those capacities. The last thing to note about the capacities is that the first two, the A1 and A2, actually are very, very small, and they're intended more for developer workloads than for actual production workloads. And so they actually have neighbors. So those two capacities share some of their physical hardware resources when it's in our cloud. At A3 and above, these are isolated. And that means that you get all of that performance with no noisy neighbors at A3 and above. Okay? So now, if you've been using Power BI, you may already know that we have some capacity SKUs. We have these P SKUs and EM SKUs. And now what we've done here is we've introduced the A SKUs. And I just wanted to make sure that you understood why you would use each of the SKUs. The A SKUs are designed to help ISVs build SaaS-style applications with elasticity, scale up, scale down, pause, resume. The EM SKUs are designed to help organizations that want to distribute content inside portals like SharePoint or inside line of business applications to authenticated AAD users who are inside the organization. Power BI has, for end users, two licensing levels, the Pro license and a free license. And the EM SKU allows you to distribute read-only content to free licensed Power BI users. When it's embedded inside a portal or an application. And then the P SKUs. The P SKUs are the best SKUs of all. They do everything the A and the EM SKUs do in terms of capacity and size and capacity. And what they'll do is they'll allow you to distribute inside large organizations as well as they handle huge workloads. So you'll be able to have larger models in your application workspaces. So but for developers, for ISVs building SaaS applications, really you're going to be looking at the A SKUs. Great. So now let's talk a little bit about how you actually go about building a Power BI embedded from soup to nuts. You really have four personas. You have the analyst, and this is the person in your organization who's going to build the report content and figure out how it integrates seamlessly into your application. Right? And so then that person is going to be working in Power BI Desktop. Power BI Desktop gives you a rich set of visualization capabilities. It gives you incredible data modeling capabilities as well as data cleanup capabilities that allow you to provide compelling insights to your users. You have a developer, and the developer is going to do all of the provisioning workflow that I showed you and a couple more steps I'll show you in a second. And they're also going to be working with our JavaScript API and our REST APIs in order to integrate the application and integrate everything together. Then you're going to have a Power BI tenant admin. This is the person I showed you in the PowerBI.com having a capacity and putting an app workspace into that capacity. That's that person. It's the person that's going to own that kind of capability. And then lastly, you're going to have a front-end developer. And the developer is going to be using probably our JavaScript API to make sure that everything comes together for the end user. Okay, so you're going to have the 4 users. Now, what data sources can you use? When we first launched the Power BI workspace collection capability, we only had 2 data sources. Now, we support every single data source that's available in Power BI. And this is the value of that converged service. Importantly, direct query works. Cached data sets work. There's an API for refreshing the data set, the cached data sets programmatically. There are APIs for setting credentials for all of the data sources that we support. What that means is that you can have pre-built content that's part of your app that's deployed and customized at runtime and provisioning time for your application end users. And then, of course, it can handle cloud data sources as well as on-premises data sources using our gateway technology. Okay, so everything is available. We have a rich API. And so we have 3 major APIs that you'll be coding against. One is our JavaScript API, and that's all about ensuring that report content looks great in your app and has rich contextual interaction between your application buttons or filters that you might apply, the report content. It also enables you to handle click events where the user's clicking around inside the reports, and as data points are selected, your application can light up and say, hey, I know something about that data point, and provide next steps actions. The second set of APIs is the REST API and the ARM API. These are APIs that your application backend is going to be using to interact with Power BI or interact with Azure resources to identify what reports are there, publish reports, save reports if they've been customized by the end user. And the last API is the Custom Visuals API. And that API allows you to build custom visualizations that show the data to your user in the way that best suits their purpose. And you have an open source iVisual interface that's documented on GitHub that makes it really easy. If you're familiar with how to write D3 data visualizations, you'll be able to pick these up very quickly. Okay? Now let's talk a little bit about the pattern. So now that we've talked about, we have the Azure embedded, how do we actually bring it all together? And I wanted to talk to you about some critical patterns you should understand in order to move forward quickly with Power BI embedded. The first is the provisioning pattern. What do you actually have to do to start from nothing to have a working Power BI embedded? The first is you're going to start building your reports. And when you build your reports, you're going to use Power BI Desktop. And you're also going to work on the data infrastructure underneath your application, because that report's going to need to connect to some data. And you're going to work through those things together so that you have the right data, you can shape it into a data model that exposes the insights. The second thing that you're going to do is you're going to provision the various pieces. And this box is probably this sort of one-time pain that you have to go through, but it's going to be well worth it. So I've already mentioned a couple of things as we saw Power BI embedded in Azure. You're going to have an Azure subscription. You're going to have an AAD tenant. And that tenant is going to have this master user account. That master user account will be the account your application backend uses to talk to Power BI, right? And that will be the only user that's trusted by Power BI. And then what you're going to do is you're going to put content into an app workspace. And that content is going to be owned by that master user account. Okay, so that master user account can access that content. The next thing that you're going to do is you're going to go into Azure and do this Power BI embedded provisioning workflow. You purchase a capacity, like I showed you earlier. And then the last thing you're going to do is you're going to create an AAD application which allows that master user to be signed in on behalf of your application to Power BI. Okay? Once you have all that in place, you can start adding reports using our JavaScript API into the front end and building the interactions between your application logic and the reports. When I showed you the warehouse example, all of these steps had been finished, right, when I was actually showing you the reports. Now, with that, I know that's a lot of little tiny things, so let's actually go through and take a look at what that looks like. I'm going to give you the whistle-stop tour of the Azure portal where all of these things are located. So typically when I set this up for the first time, what I actually do is I actually come over and I start with Active Directory. Okay? And in Active Directory, I created a Power BI embedded Active Directory. And in that directory, what I did was I created a user account. And you can see I have a couple of these user accounts. In this case, I'm using the master2 user account. Why? If I'm an ISV, I don't want this application to be part of my organization's AAD. I want it to be isolated from it because I want to have a separation between what my employees can do inside my company versus what's the infrastructure for my underlying application. So I'm going to create a new AAD. If I'm an enterprise developer building an application, I don't need to do that. I can just use my corporate AAD. That's fine. But as a SaaS ISV, I'm going to create one of these AADs. Importantly, the choice of where your AAD is located is important because that's going to drive a lot of decisions about where our physical clusters for Power BI are going to be. So you may actually end up creating several of these, one in Europe, one in North America, one in Asia, if you're a global ISV. Okay, so I'm going to go create that. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I sign up for the Power BI service with that user account. Now, I've already done that, actually. And so if I were to go and sign into www.powerbi.com, and I just go and I press this sign up button, it'll actually take me through a workflow that will make sure there's a Power BI tenant associated with that user account. Great, so that's step 2. Right? So then the next thing that I'll do is I'll go create a AAD application. So if I come back into my AAD, you'll see that I have app registrations here on the left. And what I'll do is I'll actually have an app registration for my Power BI. Now I can create one here using the new application registration, or on our website, dev.powerbi.com. There's a link in the deck, so you don't have to write that down. There's a handy register an app button that'll do this in a much easier way. So when I go into that app registration, I need to do a couple of things. The first is I'm going to need to make sure that I have a reasonable redirect URL specified. Right? Second thing is I'm going to actually go and look at app required permissions. I'm going to go and make sure, first off, I have the Power BI service permissions. Now, I can choose which of these permissions I want to give my app. Right? Typically, you'll give all of them, but sometimes you'll choose fewer than all. The second thing that you'll do is I'll go into the Windows Azure Active Directory group here. And I'll make sure that I assign this sign in and read user profile permission. If this is not checked, your Power BI embedded journey will grind to a halt. So make sure you check this one. And then the last thing that I'm going to do is here at the top of the UI, there's this little grant permissions button. And once I've set up all the permissions, what I'm going to do is I'm going to press that button. And what it's going to do is it's going to assign those permissions for all of the users in that Active Directory, which means that those users don't have to accept the standard AAD trust dialog. Right? And that's important for the way that we're going to use this master user account, which is going to be a backend account. And as a backend account, it's not going to log in interactively. No one's going to sit there and log in. It's going to log in the background. So those are the critical steps. Once you have those steps completed, then what you can do is you can actually come over to Power BI and start creating content. And the way that you do that is, if I can get my browser on the screen. What you can do here is you come into Power BI and you'll create an app workspace by pressing the Create App Workspace button. And you'll do this as that master user account. The app workspace has to be owned by that master user. So I'm going to go create that app workspace. Now, I've created one already. So you see that I have, in this particular one, I have a report. I could have dashboards. I can have multiple data sets, whatever I want in this app workspace. Okay? And then, of course, this report is just any report, right? So in this case, you can see that it's a nice interactive report, something about ticket sales. Okay? Importantly, what you're going to do here is in this URL, you're going to have this big GUID for the app workspace under the groups segment. You're going to memorize that or write it down. right? Because what's going to happen is your application is going to be using content from that app workspace to show to your user. Okay? So you're going to use that. Now, with all those things put together, then you'll be able to get our samples, and then you'll be able to start building an actual application using the overall solution. So now our samples will take a few pieces of information along the way, right? So the first, when you get this sample, you'll need to provide this client ID. I'm in the web.config for the sample. There's a link in the deck for where you get the sample. And that's the client ID from the app that you registered in AAD. The next thing that you'll have is you'll have the group ID. This is the group ID that I just showed you in the powerbi.com. You'll also give the username and password for that master user account. Why? Because what we're going to do is we're going to log in as that master user account using an unattended login workflow in my application backend. Okay? And that then is going to be able to grant my application end users permission to access report content. I'll talk to you more about how that happens in a second. Okay? So once I have all of these things working here, at that point, I would be able to actually open up a browser window, I hope. Here we go, where is it? Here, let me just restart this. What I can do is I can just open up a browser window, press F5, and I can actually see that report from that application workspace working in a report. Now here we have our standard sample. I've customized my version of the report embed to look a little bit fancier, but it's the same report that you saw in that workspace, just as interactive. And you notice how fast that was? That was pretty fast. And then the last thing that you're going to do is you're going to delve into our JavaScript API, and you'll notice that these little links here, these are actually with JavaScript callbacks. So I'm actually doing JavaScript callbacks here to set the filters inside the report. I can do more sophisticated things, but that's the progression from getting from I don't have anything through to having your first working Power BI embedded. As you notice, it only took a couple of seconds. Okay? So with that, let's hop back into the slide deck and fill in some information. That was a lot of steps. So the slides that you'll have afterwards have a cheat sheet. Okay? And you'll notice that I have all the links to all of the places here in the cheat sheet. So I won't go through that. Let's talk a little bit about authorizing users access. What happens? We saw in the workspace, in the warehouse example, the user signed in, and we knew who they were. Well, that happens in the application. The application knows who's signed in. You can sign in the user however you want. You can use OAuth, forms-based auth. You can, have canaries. I don't know what it is, right? But by the time the user starts working with Power BI, they're already signed into your application front end that's typically running in a browser. I say typically because this whole architecture works fantastically in mobile devices. So if you look at your I devices, A devices, and W devices, you can use Power BI embedded to power analytics in apps for all of those. Okay, so now let's talk about how we give an application end user access to content in Power BI. We'll start by having a Power BI and this master user here at the bottom of the slides, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to have the master user own the application content. I showed you that in the demo. The second thing that we're going to do is we're going to have the application backend log in as that master user. And then the application backend is going to call an API called generate token, or if the content is in a group, generate token in group, as the master user account. And that token is going to say that a person with this token can access a specific piece of content for a specific amount of time. And then they can go and access it. And then what the application is going to pass that over to the application front end, which is going to pass it back into Power BI. Right? Importantly, these tokens are bearer tokens, which means that if someone steals one of these things, they can replay it. So you should set them to only give access to a certain report and make sure that they expire. Okay? So that's a key thing. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about securing your data. It's one thing to secure access to the report, but in many cases you have an application. That application has multiple different customers, or even within an individual customer, there are multiple users who have different roles. So someone's a manager, someone's an employee. Okay? So how do you actually go and make it so that your application is showing only the right data to the right user. And this is a capability we call dynamic row-level security. And let's talk a little bit about that. How does row-level security work? First is inside a Power BI report, you can define something called a role. A role defines some rules that are applied whenever the report is opened based off of who the user is. The second element is that there's a token, and inside that token that you generate, you're going to put a bunch of information about who that user is. And then at runtime, we take those two pieces of information, we marry them together, and we generate the appropriate query. Okay, so what that means is that if you look at the examples, we take a basic where clause that would say select everything from sales to select everything from sales where whatever the actual appropriate predicate is. So let's take a look at that in a little bit more detail. And I think it's important to just conceptualize what generate token is doing. On the right-hand side here, you can actually see that we have, first off, an access level. If I can get a mouse pointer. Okay, I can't show it to you, sorry. So first we have the access level. This is going to give you access to either read-only, like view, or edit, or create new. So you can choose, what they can do. There's this effective username, and this is the magic when we talk about dynamic, because that effective identity is a string your application can pass into Power BI, and you choose what it is. The only constraint that you have is that thing needs also to be in your application data model in the report, so that you can actually apply, the predicate will match based on that field into what data that person should have. So you can change that out at runtime. So if I have a manager, I can say manager. If I have an employee, if I have a specific account code, I can go put that in there, and then I can design these things together. One thing to note is that the tokens that you generate will never see more data than the master user account sees. There are some cases in which the master user account's permissions matter, because you might have multiple AAD users who can access content. So it's constrained first by what data the master user account can do, second by the roles, and third by the effective identity that you choose to use inside your roles. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about content management patterns. One of the things that we've been doing over time is filling out our APIs. And we wanted to make sure that it's easy for an ISV to have content inside the application and then deploy it as new customers onboard in the application. The same thing applies actually inside the enterprise, where you can use the same APIs to manage your Power BI content in your powerbi.com. So what we're going to do is we're going to start from source control, where you'll have a Power BI report. And that Power BI report will be in a Power BI desktop file. It's going to define a template that you're going to use to deploy into each of the customers' things. What you do, the first thing that you do is use our import API. And what that'll do is that'll create a report and a data set in Power BI in your app workspace. Now, typically what people will do is they will create a single app workspace, which is a staging app workspace. And that just helps them do some content management. And then what they'll do is they'll use two new APIs that we have. The first one will create in an app workspace created for an individual customer. It'll clone that report. So it'll take a copy of it, and then it'll create a new data set for that report. You'll use the setAllConnections API to change the data source. So if the data set that I uploaded initially was for my test data, if I have customer 1, customer 2, customer 3, I can have separate data sources for each of those customers, and I can set the connections for each report to each customer's data. So I can isolate the data underneath the covers between customers. And then I'll use this rebind API, which will marry those two things together so that the report is now looking at that data set. Right? So that's the content management pattern. You're going to see that as you start doing this at scale, you're going to start using this pattern. And then the last thing that we have is we have save as. One of the things that we've allowed you to do is take reports, and you can actually edit them in a cloud service, in an embedded context. Right? So you can actually have an embedded report, an editable embedded report. Well, when that happens, you want to be able to save that artifact back. So if you need to migrate or back up and restore. So we actually have a new save as feature that exports those reports into your source control. Great. For dashboards, content management hasn't quite gotten as far along as the report, but it also follows a similar pattern. Dashboards you have to manually create, which makes it appropriate for an enterprise scenario, not really an ISV scenario. And then you can also do the clone and rebind and set connections to do the customizations. I was going to show you a demo of this, but I don't have connectivity to the environment for some reason because of the DNS right now, so I'm going to skip that. The next thing I am going to show you, though, is a huge thing for us, bringing natural language query and Power BI Q&A into embedded applications. Right? This is probably one of the things where people say, why would I use Power BI? It's because we're providing best-of-breed data tools that you would probably never implement on your own. Right? And so Power BI Q&A is an example of that. So what this allows you to do is allows you to take Q&A and bring it inside your application. You can provide your own phrases into Q&A as starting points. Your end users can customize those, and you can actually capture those phrases that the user has entered and save them in your application. So you can have a beautiful end-to-end workflow around this inside your application. And it really does demonstrate the value of the experiences Power BI is providing. So let's do a quick demo before we close out this section. Great. So what I'm going to do here is I've actually already loaded our JavaScript sample. This is the new version of the sample that's going to go live in a week or two. But this is available today. And what it does is shows you all of the code you need to go embed Q&A. It's all right here. You can just go copy and paste that. And you'll notice here that the Q&A is fully interactive, right? So I can go and, yeah, the token expired. Sorry. Let's go here. So what it'll show you is that I can actually go ahead and customize all of the phrasings, right? You'll see that it loads in here. You can choose whatever values. If I want to write in my own phrasing, I can definitely do that too. For example, I might write in something like largest sales variance. So just go throw that in here. And you'll see it provides a report. And what you should see when it's lit up, you'll actually see events are being thrown from this window out into your application so that you can actually capture this utterance and use it on your own. This is a huge capability. People have been asking for this ever since we started with Power BI Embedded. So I think that's a really amazing thing to have as a new tool in your quiver. So great. So let's round out the patterns with the patterns for Q&A. The pattern for Q&A is a little bit different than the other patterns because there's no actually fixed content. It's all imperative, right? I have a phrase. I just ask it to render the phrase. So you're going to be working with the Power BI Q&A runtime. It's going to be on top of a data set. You're going to provide a phrase using our JavaScript API, and then that's going to allow the user to explore that phrase, change it however it wants. You're going to get events that allow you to then save that phrase if you want to reconstitute it later, right? So you can build applications where users are typing in new phrases and then pinning those visualizations to inside your application. It's actually a pretty compelling experience. Let's pivot a little bit now and talk about custom visuals. So who's built a custom visuals for Power BI? Okay, a few fewer hands, right? So if you've not done this, I encourage you to give it a shot. It's actually really easy to do. But it allows you to take data and show it to your end users in a unique way. And we actually have had a lot of success in the market with this capability because when we think about ISV applications, often the domain of those applications is not kind of like normal data visualization. It could be a warehouse scenario. It could be nuclear physics, quantum computing. I don't know what you want to visualize, right? But showing the data to the user just the right way is going to enable them to make better decisions. One of my favorite examples of this is Nintex. Nintex is a company that does workflow automation. They have this product called Hawkeye. Their entire UI is this massive Power BI custom visualization. And they built it in a very specific way to help people understand the complexity of process workflows inside an organization. And they boiled it down to this very, very simple presentation. And they could only do that because Power BI had this capability. Of course, we also have a gallery of visuals that's available that has over 100 visuals at this point in the store, so you can go take a look at a lot of examples. And it's really easy to publish them. So if you wanted to, we have a lot of providers. We have companies like Esri that are providing mapping visualizations inside Power BI built on the same infrastructure that you can use to build your custom visuals. So it provides deep and rich integration and lets you show off your service or your skill in Power BI. Okay? So a couple of things. We've been on a roll with the Custom Visuals SDK. We've been adding more and more to our open source GitHub repo. The latest version has added support for slicers, which is critical, right? So slicers allow you to filter reports, have those selections persisted. So you can now do a in-list, contains, which are sort of string operations, as well as greater than and less than slicers that provide between semantics. The next thing that we're doing, and this is going to come in a couple of weeks, we hope, maybe a month or so, is what we're calling Open URL or Launch URL. And that's going to allow you to build a button that when a user clicks it, it's going to open a URL to another service. So it's going to be a huge capability, lots of demand for that, and it's coming in the fall of this year. Okay? We have a whole set of developer resources. If you wanted to take a picture, this is a good slide to take. It'll also be in the deck. But this is going to allow you then to get started really, really quickly. I highly recommend our Developer Center. That's the one-stop shop for everything that I've talked about today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Miguel, who's going to talk about the Data Connector SDK.
Thank you, Lucas. So to close the session, we're going to talk about the Data Connectors SDK. We're going to talk about how to allow you to build a custom connector that you can easily plug into Power BI. So first of all, you might wonder, okay, why would that be useful for me? So here would be a few canonical scenarios. Number one, we do support over 75 different data sources in Power BI today. If you go to Power BI Desktop, Get Data, you'll see that full list. And we also support things through generic interfaces, things like ODBC, OData, OLEDB, REST APIs. But you might want to also provide more richer support for specific sources that, for example, if you want to build something on top of a REST API, on top of an OData feed, make it show up as a first-class connector in that Get Data dialog, that would be an area for you to explore. That's definitely possible here with the Custom Connector SDK. Also, you might want to wrap just the logic to connect to a REST API, which you can do today, but you might want to wrap it in a custom connector so that you encapsulate that complexity for your end users. Likewise, if you have a service that exposes OAuth v2 as the authentication today, you could use the Custom Connector SDK to actually build that logic into the connector so it's seamless for users to authenticate when trying to connect to that data source. And finally, last but not least, we also have the ability to create Power BI apps or content packs as they were known as before. These are the out-of-the-box content or templates that you can get from the Power BI service. So by virtue of building a data connector, you might be building just the building blocks that you'll need to then create your content pack on top. So for example, if you had a SaaS service that exposes some REST APIs or maybe even OData APIs, you might choose to go and build your connector using the Custom Connector SDK and build a content pack with a set of out-of-the-box reports and dashboards on top. And then you could submit that content pack through our content pack certification program so that it shows up within App Source in Power BI when you go in Power BI Service Get Data. And in addition to that, you could also submit your connector so that we can expose that connector in Power BI Desktop, and that will give you the right balance between having some out-of-the-box content on Power BI Service with some standard reports and dashboards, and then also providing the raw connector in Power BI Desktop for someone to build a report from scratch that's fully customized. So that's, if you think about the set of connectors that we exposed today, that's how we do with many of our existing connectors. If you look at the Salesforce connector, if you look at the GitHub connector, Marketo, all of those, we actually provide both a content pack that's predefined and then a connector in Power BI Desktop for full customization for customers. The last point, if you have an ODBC-based data source and you have an ODBC driver and you would like to connect to it and also use something like direct query mode, you'd be able to use that or to do that by creating a custom connector. I'm going to show you a demo of how to do this today. So this is how it really works at the high level. That's you guys wondering, okay, how do I actually bring that data source that I have. It's either a SaaS service or it might be an on-prem source even, and how do I connect that with Power BI? So what you would do as the developer trying to enable that access would be to leverage Visual Studio, where we've created a custom connectors or Power Query SDK that you can download today and use. It will allow you to create that template, that template connector, and then from there on you can start coding it in Visual Studio, and then you would iterate between Visual Studio and Power BI Desktop to actually test that connector. You would create that connector using M code. M is the language that powers Power Query behind the scenes. And you'll be able to just quickly iterate and refine that connector by using Power BI Desktop as well. You can actually go even and use Power BI Desktop as the authoring tool, in the sense that if you want to connect to that API with Desktop and maybe apply a few different transformations and so on, maybe add some parameters as well, and from there just grab that generated M code behind the scenes from the advanced editor and just paste that into your extension, into your custom connector. That's also possible, and you can use Power BI Desktop as a design tool in that way as well. At the end of all, as we were saying, you're going to be generating a few lines of M code. For the majority of the connectors we've worked on, we're just talking about a couple hundred lines of code, and there's really like a lot of it is just standard across different connectors. It's just the way we structure that code. It really comes down to like 15, 20 lines of code tops. For configuring things like authentication, and then if you're actually trying to build a direct query capable connector through ODBC, you also need to define capabilities supported by the driver and that kind of thing. So it's I wouldn't say straightforward, but it's within the realm of what's possible in like a couple days if you actually know a little bit about how ODBC or REST APIs work. So after you produce that report, that connector created in Visual Studio using the custom connectors SDK based on M, you're going to be able to deploy that to Power BI Desktop, so give it to your users, and it will just show up within the Get Data dialog. And that would enable many more users to actually use this. So that definitely would be helpful for different scenarios. We talked about the different data sources that you could enable, but there's also I see two main buckets of users or developers who would like to do this. ISVs who would like to develop a connector that they serve to people across many different companies, and you could use this and distribute the connector outside of Power BI Desktop today. You could even provide like an installer experience that puts the connector in the right folder, which is within the documents folder for that user. Or you could also use this for your internal organization. Maybe you have some internal OData services or data feeds or REST services or even ODBC that you as IT would like to serve to your end users and your data analysts within your company. You could also use this mechanism as a way to create a private connector, if you allow me to use that expression, a private connector to your organization for your end users. We were talking about a few different implementation options. We mentioned OData, ODBC, REST. So there's, depending on the one you choose, there is different levels of support. For example, if you use OData, you're not going to be able to do direct query on top of that. But the advantage actually is that for an import-only connector, that's the easiest approach, because it suddenly inherits all of the built-in OData behaviors that we have today, such as schema and query folding and generating the right OData query syntax behind the scenes. So what you achieve with this is basically just being able to get that top-level entry, like connector entry in that Get Data dialog for your specific service, which then internally just uses the OData stack that we have. A little bit more complex, but also richer, is the ODBC approach, where the complexity really depends on how compliant your ODBC driver is in terms of support for ANSI SQL 92, and the capabilities and the generation you customize as part of that M logic in the connector. But this approach supports direct query if you want to use that. REST APIs, direct query not currently supported, but coming in the future. Complexity is where it's really, could vary a lot between different services, because you can go from a very simple connector that provides just the branding and the auth and the nav experience to find those tables and entities that you want to expose, to then also implementing richer notions like being able to page so that you just bring a page of data every time, not the entire data set. You can also do things like defining query parameters and parameterizing your connector itself. As mentioned here, direct query support here is rocket science, but we're trying to make that easier. The last couple of approaches are ADO.NET based. So if you have an ADO.NET driver, you're also going to be able to build that using our custom connector SDK. Again, complexity varies here. And then we're also looking at other approaches in the future, by calling other M library functions, so you can build on top of any of the existing library functions that we have, so you can leverage any of the other connectors that we already have, for example. So let's go and do a quick demo. Switch into my machine over here. All right, it recognized me. When I first configured that Windows Hello thing, I hadn't shaved for like a couple weeks. Then the day I shaved, I came back and it didn't recognize me. I had to rerun the tool. All right, so here we are. Let me close a few things, if I can. OK, let's come back here. So I'm in Visual Studio, and we're going to go create a new project. I'm going to go File, New, Project. And I've already installed the Power Query SDK, but you can easily find that through the Visual Studio plugin store and experience. So you get a couple options. You can do an entire data connector project or just a specific PQ file, which is just a single file of M code. We're going to go the data connector project route. And I'm going to show you how to actually build a connector against Hive. Hive LLAP, I think probably you guys have heard about Hive LLAP. Right? So it's actually one of the connectors we're going to release in the next couple months in Power BI Desktop. But I just wanted to show you how it is built on the inside, which is actually leveraging the same connectors API and SDK that we are serving for everyone. So this will create a new project that has a few different files. Let's go and take a look at the Solution Explorer here. The first thing we have is a bunch of icons. These icons drive basically how your connector is going to show up with an icon next to it in the Get Data dialog, in the Recent Data Sources list, and then we have different sizes that, depending on the, DPI and the display settings that you're using, it will leverage one or the other icon. It will just look, your connector look better. A couple more files. Hive.pq is where most of the connector logic lives, and we're going to go dig into this in a little bit. And then we have hive.query.pq. This is basically, think about it as a test file. So you would write hive.pq or your connector.pq with the entire connector logic and authentication, and then you use this .query file to actually write some queries that then you can test against the code that you've just written. The other thing we have is a resources file, a resx file, that will drive the actual labels and the title that will show up in the Get Data dialog for your connector, as well as the tooltips. So in the interest of time, because we just have a little bit over 10 minutes, rather than coding from scratch, I'm actually going to go and pull a copy-paste on you guys, which is taking the entire source for this connector, and I'm going to paste it into hive.pq and save that. And now I'm going to walk through that code. So a few things in here. The first thing, we're going to be using the HiveODBC driver to build this connector. So you define that driver name. This matches the registered name for that driver after you install it in your system. A couple more interesting things. Hive type is going to define things like, okay, what's the connector dialog going to look like? So what are the input fields that you need? In this case, we're going to be asking for a server. So we have a server value in here that defines the caption, the description, and then the sample values, which is the watermark text that shows inside the input box as an example for the user. We're going to do a similar thing for the database field with some default value as well. And then we're going to do options. So you can add additional options to your connector. So things like the command timeout would go here. If you wanted to enable something like a native database query, this is also how you would do that. And then you define that as a table with some additional metadata for the function name that you want. In this case, it would be something like hive.database, and we'll say the description will be like retrieving the databases within a Hive server. Hive IMPL is actually the meat here. This is where the connector logic is defined. And actually, by the way, for those of you familiar with M already, by using it in Power Query, this is M code. So if you've already defined functions within the query editor in Power Query, this would be a syntax that's really familiar to you. This would be the equivalent to your function name or query name. And then you get the list of parameters, and then you get that syntax for then going into the body of the function. And then you have the usual let block with a bunch of things in it, and then you have a final in statement that basically evaluates, and then from here it resolves all of the steps, or in this case variables defined above. So what have we done in this function? The first thing we've done is assign the credential, and then we're going to be looking at the input. So the user has provided server and database, and optionally some options in the options record. In this case, we're going to start looking at the database. So if it's not null, the input, we're going to use that specific field, like database name. Otherwise, we'll just go to the default database in the Hive server. The next thing we're doing is just fixing up the the address for the server. So the user might have specified the server name. We're going to be adding 443 as the port, and then we're going to call into getAddress. GetAddress is a helper function that we've defined also in this file, and I can go down here and find it. It receives the server and then the port number as a number, and then it just extracts those pieces and then appends HTTP, and then does some logic about the default port that's specific to Hive in this case. But you can do that kind of manipulation to just get the server and port in the right shape. So we've called that from here, from the to define the connection string. So we've done the address, and then this connection string also expects, of course, the driver, which we use the driver name as we define in the second line in this file. And then we specify what schema we want, what SSL configuration, and then what auth mechanism to use. In terms of defining the credentials, in this case, it's going to be username and password. So this is how we actually define it. We define it as part of the options record. We have the credential for the connection string, and then we say user ID is going to match the username component of a credential, and then a password. And then here is where we define additional options, such as the connection timeout, the command timeout. So you can assign a specific value or just default to the default settings that we have for those in the M engine. You can also do other things like define connection pooling, true, false, and also some things like hierarchical navigation, which will drive if you want to show the schema grouping, or like group things by a schema versus just like showing the flat list of tables. Navigation properties to give a richer experience around navigation. And here is where you get into defining the SQL capabilities that your driver supports. You'll do things like define the level of compliance with SQL 92, whether you support group by, support stop operations, numbers, strings, escape characters. You define what escape characters your driver understands, date, literals, time. So it's basically providing us enough information about your driver so we can provide an optimized experience on top in terms of query folding and performance. And then we're also defining some SQL get info information here for like the SQL string functions, and some additional ways of binding the API to some parameters. Finally, we have some overall AST visitor patterns that you can reuse. This is actually pretty easy to reuse across connectors, so don't worry too much about that. And then after we've set all of that context, you actually do the call to say, I'm going to call odbc.dataSource, which is the standard mashup engine function for connecting to an ODBC driver in this case, and pull data. And we're going to pass in that connection string that we created in this let block with that set of options, including the credentials and the command connection timeout. And then we're going to retrieve the data and then expose it as what we call a navigation table. So what this would basically provide as the output would be the list of tables available within that database. We already talked about getAddress. We briefly talked about the data source description. So in this case, it's just saying the data source is called Hive, and the authentication that it expects is username and password. And then you can do data source.ui publishing description. So this is basically defining how should the data source show up within the get data dialog. So the first thing is Do we want the connector to show up with a beta tag so that it's beta versus GA, and you can configure that just with true false value. You can also pick which category within that get data dialog it should show up to. So let me show you what I mean. So if I'm in Power BI Desktop and I go to the get data dialog, I have all of these categories. So if I go to something like database, I can tag certain things as beta. So you can control that, and you can decide if you want to show up under database, or maybe you want to show up under online services. That's completely configurable for you. A few more things that you can configure here. The actual text for the button, which you define under the resx file. So let's go and change this. So rather than just calling it Hive, I'm going to say my Hive connector at Ignite is going to be the button title, and I'm going to save that. Then we can configure the label and the tooltip and all of that with a custom connector. Let's define that, and then we go back to hive.pq. Let's save that. And a couple more things you can configure. A learn more URL, so if you actually have documentation for your connector, you can also expose it this way so that end users in the desktop can just click that learn more link and go find out more about your connector capabilities or your data source. And then you also point to the icons. And the icons we've defined as a record here, hive.icons, and it exposes the list of icons that we just had added to the product, to the solution. And then just a bit here to say, do you want to expose the option to give users the radio button for import versus direct query or not? In this case, we want to do that. So this is pretty much ready to go. We can go and write some basic test here to make sure this works. So I have my function here, so I'm going to go say hive.database. And we're going to pass two parameters, which are the server name and then the database name. And I have my, I should have my other file here. Credentials, so here is where I have my confidential stuff. This is my server name. And as long as database name goes, we'll just use default. So we'll save that. And now we're going to start this and we're going to debug our connector. So now we're actually running a query against, like basically using that M code, and we're sending that request to connect to that server and then that database. And the first thing we get is credentials are missing, of course, because it's the first time that I connect to this thing, right? So I'm going to go and define that. And this is a little interactive experience where you can pick the credential type. In this case, because we only expose username password, that's the only option that I get to pick. I could also specify a privacy level if I want to configure that here. I can also do that. And then I need to specify my username and my password, which if I remember correctly, this is HDI user, and that one, I always mistype it, so I'm just going to paste it in. So now we've set the credential, and I can close and rerun this. And now it should actually be able to establish that connection successfully and retrieve that navigational table that exposes the list of tables within the default database in this specific Hive server. So that's it. In this case, there's only one table. It's called Hive sample table. It doesn't have a description, but then it has the data with that nested table is what we will actually consume when you select that table. And then the next field, the kind, is just indicating that this is a table output so that it will drive the icon that shows up in the navigator dialog for your connector. So with this, we've actually built a connector, but the fun part is actually deployed so that it shows up in Power BI Desktop, right? So let's go and switch this to release, and then we're going to go build the solution. And as I do that, if I come back to my project folder, so I can go to Documents and go to Visual Studio 2015 that I was using, Projects. I have Hive, is the thing we just created a few minutes ago. And I can dig into the project folder under bin, release, and I have this file, hive.mess. This is the way we package the file, and I can actually show you what it looks like if I redo this and we change this guy, I change that to a zip file rather than a mess file. Sure, I want to change it. This is what we actually package inside. Hive.m is the equivalent to the hive.pq file that we just defined. So in fact, if I look at it, it's exactly what we were walking through in Visual Studio. Then we have the icons, and then we have the resource file. So that's all that is in there. And if I take that file, I can go back to my documents folder. This is a step that you will have to have your end users actually do manually, or you can do that as part of your deployment logic. You need to create a folder that's called Microsoft Power BI Desktop within Documents, and then another folder inside that's custom connectors. If you go in here, you can then deploy that mesh file, that custom connector. So now you need to close Power BI Desktop to reload. Just something to keep in mind, the feature is currently exposed in the preview, so you need to come to the options dialog, and from here go to preview features. Make sure that custom data connectors option is enabled. So once that's done, I'm going to close and relaunch the desktop so that it picks up new extensions. And then we will go back to that Get Data dialog, and you remember how I showed you the database tab within the Get Data dialog, and there was not a Hive connector in there, right? So the proof that the demo work is that it's going to show up now. So if I go to Get Data and I go to Database, I go at the last bottom of the dialog here of the list, and I have my Hive connector built at Ignite, and it's branded as beta. So when I click Connect, it's going to warn me that this is a preview or beta connector. I can hit Continue, and then I actually get to specify the parameters that I just defined. So we can go connect to that server again. So here's my server, and the database was default. And then I get to pick import versus direct query. So let's go with direct query. Now it's actually not going to ask me for credentials because I had tried this before and I had provided them. But otherwise, I would have seen the credentials dialog with that same username and password input boxes. But in any case, we're now in the navigator dialog, and we see the equivalent output. So we see that one table, Hive sample table, with a preview of the data, and I can now just select it and load it or edit it. And from here on, it's just like a regular Power BI desktop connector. I can go into the query editor, apply transforms. Depending on the level of richness of your ODBC driver and what you've configured in the connector, it may fold more or less operations to the underlying SQL 92 dialect. Then you can also build reports and visualizations on top of this data. So it makes it really seamless. Just to show you that I'm not lying, here's the data. Let's pick something like the session ID and look at it as a card. I think we had like 50,000 rows in this data set, something like that. Let me show this as a count. So this is actually doing a direct query, and it's connecting back to that Hive LLAP endpoint and retrieving just the count of session ID. It's going to take a few seconds depending on the Wi-Fi network, but it should be coming any moment. So it's about 60,000 rows, not big, but not small either. So it gives you an idea hopefully it gave you an idea for how relatively easy it is or straightforward to actually build a connector. And let me switch to the right input here. Okay, so I think we're actually over time. Just wanted to do a quick recap. You can easily create custom connectors using the Data Connectors SDK, the Power Query SDK. I showed you Visual Studio 2015, but it also works with 2017. You can find it through the Visual Studio extension library. You can write the connector in M, so you can actually piggyback a lot on the Power Query user experience to actually build your query steps and then just copy-paste that into your query logic in the connector. You can leverage existing functions. We did use odbc.database in the demo that I showed. Currently, this approach, or the custom connector SDK, is only supported in Power BI Desktop, but we plan to expand that support to the on-premises data gateway over the next few months before the end of a calendar year, so that you can complete the end-to-end to deploy this to an on-premises data gateway, and so that your users, when they publish a report to the Power BI service that leverages one of these custom connectors, they can actually make sure that the data is kept up to date in the Power BI service. Even beyond that, we're actually expanding support for custom connectors beyond Power BI and to include things like Power Apps, Flow, Logic Apps, and so on, Azure Analysis Services, Excel, of course, including Power Query. This is all coming between end of this year and early 2018. We started with Power BI, and once we complete that end-to-end, we'll expand to additional services. We also have a session this afternoon about custom connectors for Power Apps, Logic Apps, and Flow that you may want to consider going to, because it talks about how you can leverage the same SDK to actually build connectors for those solutions as well. And then suddenly, the value of the connectors that you build multiply, right? In terms of a roadmap, I kind of mentioned this already. Currently, custom connectors supported in the desktop. If you actually want to certify a content pack, we have a program for that for ISVs. Planned for the rest of this year or early 2018 is the gateway, richer support for versioning and dependency reporting for the connector, improving support for our library function extensions, and last but not least, distribution through the Office store. So similar to what Lucas showed with the custom visuals, that you can consume them from the Office store, we're going to head there for custom connectors as well to make it easier for you to deploy them and to make it easier for your users to actually discover and consume them. A few helpful links. We have a GitHub repo. We also have a session from the Data Insight Summit. I like this one because Matt Mason, who is way more expert in the SDK than I am, does a completely built from scratch a connector, and he's actually showing it using a REST API as the data source. So today I walked you through ODBC. The other very popular approach is REST API, so with this you'd get to see the other alternatives as well. We also have a bunch of samples in Matt Mason's GitHub repository, and we also have an M deep dive video on channel 9. We have a step-by-step tutorials as part of a GitHub collection of samples, so you can follow that along. With that, please evaluate the session. We hope you like it. We really are interested in your input and your comments and feedback about the session. What did you like, what you didn't, and overall about the conference. And again, thanks for coming this week, and hope you enjoyed the rest of the conference.